What if I told you that some of the most confident people you'll ever meet are almost invisible online? Think about it. In a world where millions of people upload selfies every single day, where every meal, holiday, gym session and life update is shared with strangers, there are still people who rarely post photographs of themselves. No profile updates. No carefully edited selfies. No endless stream of attention-seeking posts. Just silence. And here's where it gets interesting. Psychologists have spent years studying social media behavior, self-esteem, validation, identity and attention. What they've discovered challenges many of the assumptions we make about people who stay quiet online. Most people assume these individuals are shy, antisocial, insecure, private. But what if the truth is far more surprising? What if some people stop posting themselves online not because they're hiding from the world, but because they've stopped needing the world's approval? Today we're exploring the fascinating psychology of people who don't post their photos on social media, and by the end of this video, you may never look at online popularity in quite the same way again. Social media has become one of the defining features of modern life. Whether it's Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, or another platform, billions of people now spend part of their day scrolling through carefully curated snapshots of other people's lives. We see smiling faces, luxury holidays, perfect relationships, dream careers, and endless moments designed to attract likes, comments and attention. But beneath this digital landscape lies an important psychological question. Why do some people choose not to participate? Why do some individuals avoid posting photographs of themselves, despite having access to the same platforms as everyone else? The answer isn't simple. Human behavior rarely is. Some avoid posting because of anxiety. Some because of privacy concerns. Others because they've developed a completely different relationship with identity, self-worth, and validation. As we move through this story, we'll uncover hidden psychological traits, surprising research findings and powerful mindset shifts that separate people who constantly seek attention from those who quietly build confidence away from the spotlight. And what you'll discover might reveal more about your own relationship with social media than you expect. To understand people who don't post photos, we first need to understand why so many people do. Imagine you're living in Britain 20 years ago. You go on holiday. You take photographs. You print them. Maybe you show them to family members or close friends. That was it. The purpose of the photograph was memory. Today, the purpose has often shifted. For many people, photographs are no longer just memories. They're social signals. A way of communicating status, attractiveness, success, happiness, and belonging. Every like becomes a tiny form of social approval. Every comment becomes a signal that somebody noticed. And according to psychological research, these signals can activate reward pathways in the brain associated with dopamine, the same neurotransmitter involved in motivation and anticipation. That's why social media can feel addictive. You're not simply sharing a picture. You're waiting for a response. Waiting to see who reacts. Waiting to see whether people approve. For some individuals, this cycle becomes deeply embedded in daily life. A photo isn't complete until it's been posted. A holiday doesn't feel real until it's shared. A personal achievement isn't fully satisfying until other people acknowledge it. Over time, something subtle begins to happen. External validation starts replacing internal validation. Instead of asking themselves, "Am I happy with this?" people begin asking, "Will others like this?" And that question changes everything. Because once your self-worth becomes connected to external approval, you're handing control of your emotions to strangers. This is where our story begins to split. On one side are people who increasingly rely on social feedback. On the other side are people who slowly detach from it. And that second group often develops a very different mindset. Let's address one of the biggest misconceptions immediately. Many people assume that individuals who don't post photographs are insecure. At first glance, that seems logical. If someone avoids showing themselves online, perhaps they're self-conscious. Perhaps they lack confidence. And sometimes that's true. But not always. In fact, psychologists often distinguish between two very different forms of avoidance. The first comes from fear. The second comes from freedom. A person driven by fear avoids posting because they're worried about judgment. They're concerned about criticism. They're anxious about how others perceive them. But a person driven by freedom avoids posting for a completely different reason. They simply don't feel compelled to seek attention. They don't need constant reassurance. Their sense of identity exists independently of social media. From the outside, both individuals may appear identical. Neither posts many photographs. But internally, they're worlds apart. One is hiding. The other is liberated. And that's why social media behavior alone rarely tells the full story. The truly fascinating question isn't whether someone posts. It's why they post, or don't post. Because motivation reveals far more than behavior. And as we'll soon discover, Many people who rarely share photographs possess psychological strengths that often go unnoticed in today's attention-driven culture. Imagine two people receiving the exact same compliment. The first person feels wonderful. The second appreciates it, but remains emotionally stable regardless. What's the difference? The answer lies in where they derive their sense of worth. People who depend heavily on external validation often experience emotional highs and lows based on the reactions of others. Praise lifts them. Criticism crushes them. Silence makes them anxious. Their emotional state becomes tied to external feedback. But individuals with strong internal validation operate differently. They still appreciate kindness. They still enjoy positive feedback. They're still human. However, their core self-worth comes from within. They evaluate themselves according to personal values, rather than public opinion. This mindset often develops through life experience. Perhaps they've faced rejection before. Perhaps they've learned that public approval is temporary. Perhaps they've realized that trying to please everyone is impossible. Whatever the reason, they eventually reach a powerful conclusion. Not everyone has to understand me. Not everyone has to approve of me. And not everyone has to see everything I do. That belief creates freedom. Freedom from comparison. Freedom from performance. Freedom from constantly managing an online image. Interestingly, many highly successful individuals maintain surprisingly low social media visibility. Not because they're incapable of attracting attention, but because their focus is directed elsewhere. Towards mastery. Towards meaningful relationships. Towards personal growth. Towards real-life experiences. And this leads us to one of the most profound psychological shifts in modern society. The difference between living life and performing life. Imagine you're standing on a beautiful beach during a holiday. The waves are rolling in. The sky is glowing orange. The air feels perfect. Now imagine two different reactions. The first person immediately reaches for their mobile phone. They start taking photographs, recording videos, adjusting angles, thinking about captions, considering how the moment will appear online. The second person simply stands there, watching, feeling, experiencing. Neither approach is inherently right or wrong, but they reveal different psychological priorities. One is focused on documenting the experience. The other is focused on living it. Researchers have increasingly explored the impact of constant documentation on human attention and memory. When we're excessively focused on capturing moments, we can become partially detached from experiencing them directly. Instead of immersing ourselves in reality, we begin observing reality through a screen. And social media amplifies this effect. Because once an experience becomes content, a subtle performance element enters the picture. How will this look? Will people be impressed? Which photograph should I choose? What will others think? Again, this isn't necessarily unhealthy. But when repeated endlessly, it can create a habit of viewing life through the lens of audience perception. People who rarely post photographs often reject this mindset, consciously or unconsciously. They prefer ownership over observation, experience over exhibition, presence over performance. And here's the fascinating part. Many of them report feeling less pressure, less comparison, less anxiety, because they're no longer turning every meaningful moment into a public presentation. Instead, they're allowing experiences to belong to them, not to an audience, not to an algorithm, not to a collection of strangers scrolling past, just to them. And that simple shift can dramatically change how life feels. Because the most valuable moments are not always the ones that receive the most attention. Sometimes the most meaningful experiences are the ones nobody else ever sees. Now, before we go any further, let's clear up an important misconception. Not posting photographs on social media does not automatically make someone intelligent. However, researchers studying human behavior have noticed an interesting pattern. Many highly reflective individuals tend to be more selective about what they share online. Why? Because they often spend more time thinking about consequences. They understand that every photograph uploaded becomes part of a permanent digital footprint. A moment that feels insignificant today may still exist years later. Future employers may see it. Future colleagues may find it. Future relationships may encounter it. People who think long-term often become cautious about broadcasting every detail of their lives. But there's another reason. Highly reflective people are frequently more interested in understanding life than displaying it. While others focus on being noticed, they focus on observing. They enjoy analyzing situations, learning skills, reading books, building businesses, developing expertise, solving problems. Their attention naturally moves inward rather than outward. And because social media often rewards visibility rather than depth, these individuals may appear strangely absent from the digital world. Yet behind the scenes, they're often growing in ways that aren't immediately visible. The irony is remarkable. In today's culture, visibility is frequently mistaken for achievement. But some of the most significant personal transformations happen in complete silence. Nobody sees the early mornings. Nobody sees the failures. Nobody sees the sacrifices. Nobody sees the years of effort. They only see the result. And people who understand this truth often become less concerned with broadcasting the process, because they know that real growth doesn't require an audience. Let's talk about something that has become increasingly rare: privacy. A generation ago, privacy was normal. Today, privacy is often treated as suspicious. When someone doesn't share their personal life online, people immediately become curious. What are they hiding? Why don't they post anything? Are they okay? But choosing privacy isn't necessarily about secrecy. It's often about boundaries. Psychologists describe boundaries as invisible lines that protect emotional well-being. Healthy boundaries help people decide what belongs to them and what belongs to the public. People who rarely post photographs frequently have strong boundaries. They understand that not every experience needs validation. Not every relationship requires public exposure. Not every achievement needs an announcement. Some moments gain value precisely because they're private. Think about your happiest memories. Many of them probably weren't created for an audience. They were genuine, authentic, unfiltered. The laughter shared with close friends. A quiet conversation with someone you love. A personal victory nobody else knew about. These moments mattered because they were experienced, not displayed. And this mindset becomes increasingly powerful in a world where oversharing has become normal. Because privacy creates space. Space to think. Space to grow. Space to make mistakes. Space to become who you are without constant public judgment. And perhaps that's one reason why some of the happiest people seem surprisingly invisible online. They've protected parts of their lives from public consumption. Not because those parts aren't valuable, but because they are. Imagine walking into a room where everyone is competing. Not openly, not aggressively, but subtly. One person shows off their new car. Another displays their latest holiday. Someone else highlights their fitness progress. Another shares career success. Social media often feels exactly like that room. A never-ending comparison environment. And comparison is one of the fastest ways to damage self-esteem. Because you're rarely comparing reality with reality. You're comparing your behind-the-scenes life with someone else's highlight reel. You see their best moments, their best photographs, their biggest achievements, their happiest smiles. But you don't see the stress, the arguments, the failures, the loneliness, the uncertainty, the fear. As a result, social media creates an illusion. It makes ordinary lives appear extraordinary. And it makes ordinary people feel inadequate. People who stop posting photographs often begin escaping this cycle. They gradually shift attention away from external comparison and back towards personal progress. Instead of asking, "Am I doing better than them?" they begin asking, "Am I doing better than yesterday?" That single shift changes everything. Because comparison focuses on others. Growth focuses on yourself. Comparison creates envy. Growth creates improvement. Comparison creates insecurity. Growth creates confidence. And over time, many individuals discover that reducing their participation in online performance dramatically improves their mental well-being. Not because social media is inherently bad, but because their relationship with it becomes healthier. Here's a question worth considering. Who usually feels the strongest need to prove themselves? Someone who already believes in themselves? Or someone who still doubts themselves? Of course, human psychology is complex. But generally speaking, the less secure people feel internally, the more likely they are to seek reassurance externally. This doesn't mean everyone who posts photographs lacks confidence. Far from it. But truly deep confidence often looks different from what people expect. It tends to be quieter, less performative, less dependent on applause. A confident person doesn't necessarily need strangers to confirm their value. They already know who they are. And because they know who they are, they feel less pressure to constantly demonstrate it. Think about genuinely successful people you've encountered. The most impressive individuals are often surprisingly humble. They don't spend every conversation talking about achievements. They don't constantly advertise their accomplishments. They simply live them. The same principle frequently applies online. People who possess strong internal confidence often feel little urgency to broadcast every aspect of their lives. They're comfortable existing without attention. Comfortable being unseen. Comfortable being misunderstood. And that level of self-assurance is far rarer than most people realize. Now we arrive at the most important insight of this entire video. The real difference between people who constantly seek attention and people who don't isn't social media. It's identity. At some point, many people unknowingly build an identity around being seen, being liked, being noticed, being validated. Their sense of self becomes tied to visibility. If visibility increases, they feel valuable. If visibility decreases, they feel invisible. But people who rarely post photographs often make a different discovery.